crunchy. Oh my goodness. This is the classic sourdough bread you've been seeing everywhere that you need to learn how to make in your own kitchen. I'm gonna show you how to do it. It is the night before I'm wanting to make my classic sourdough bread. And I like to use the levain method, which basically means that I'm taking my active sourdough starter and I feed my starter, keep it active, keep it strong. And when I want to bake with it, I will pull out of that starter, I will mix up a separate starter or levain, and that is what I will actually use in my bread. Okay, and the reason you do that is a couple reasons. It acts as a power feed and it allows this kind of pre-ferment, is kind of what it's called. It allows that to be exactly what your dough needs. And so for this specific recipe, we are going to take 10 grams of this active sourdough starter. I use my scale. Gotta tear my scale and go to my grams. There we go. We're gonna do 10 grams. And then I could feed this starter. I'm gonna stick it back in my fridge. I'm gonna use it in different ways over the next, few days for different bakes. Then I'm gonna add in 100 grams of water and 100 grams of flour. Now you could use a bread flour, you could use an all-purpose flour if you wanted to do like a half whole wheat. It would speed this fermentation up a little bit. But basically I'm feeding my pretty strong active starter because I use it all the time. I'm feeding a little bit of that with fresh flour and water. I'm gonna mix it up. This is a 1 to 10 to 10 ratio. That means I have 1 part starter to 10 parts flour, 10 parts water. So it's gonna take all night long for this to rise, to get bubbly, active, and strong, so that tomorrow morning when I wake up, it will be nice and ready for me to bake with. There it is. I'm gonna cover it. And my house is kind of cold, so I'm actually gonna set it in a bread proofer. You just wanna find a warm place for it, just like you would your sourdough starter. So somewhere that could be on top of an appliance, could be an oven light on, just don't turn your oven on. It could be, I've even seen people use coolers where they put hot water in it to kind of act as a pseudo proofing box. I like to use a proofing box. You could also use a dough mat, you let dough rise on, or a little bit of a heating pad. Use a buffer with a towel. So many different ways. I actually have a whole article about how temperature impacts your sourdough. Definitely check that out along with a bunch of free sourdough guides. But we're gonna come back tomorrow and mix up our classic sourdough bread. I just pulled my ripe active levain out of my bread proofer. It took maybe about 10 to 12 hours. This is what it looks like. See all the bubbles on the top? If I bring my spoon in here, that is active ripe. It's doubled in size. Look how beautiful it is. Full of air, full of bubbles. This is ready for me to add to my bread. We're gonna start off by just adding our levain to our bowl. This is 200 grams that we're putting in here because this recipe makes 2 loaves of that classic sourdough bread. So we're gonna get just right about 200 grams worth of this levain. Sometimes people say, what do I do if I have any extra left over? You can add that straight into a discard jar, or you can even feed this and create more if you really wanted to. But the purpose of levain is kind of that you don't do that, that you just use it all up in your bake. You could also use a ripe active sourdough starter if you had that on hand as well. You just want 200 grams of that instead of that levain step. All right, so we've got this in our bowl. We're gonna pour in the water. Now, when you add the water, it's actually really important the temperature of your water, because this is the one thing that you can really affect to bring the temperature of your dough up or down. And the temperature of sourdough is very, very important to getting that good rise. A sourdough culture loves the temperature range of like 76 to 80 degrees. So anything that you can do to keep your dough and your starter in that temperature range, the better your bread is going to be. If you go too far above that, then those bacteria kind of start to take over. If you go too far below that, the wild yeast won't activate. So that is kind of that happy temperature range that you want to shoot for. So we're going to add in some warm, I guess it's actually more room temperature water. You can see how this levain or starter is actually kind of floating on my water. Now this is called the float test. You don't actually need to do this, but it just shows you like, okay, this is just kind of a little check that it's active, it's ready, and it's going to be able to raise my bread dough because it has already those air bubbles and stuff that make it float on water. So you go ahead and mix these two together in the bowl. I sometimes use my hands, and I often use my dough whisk. When I was starting sourdough, I did not have all of these different sourdough tools. You do not need all the tools to make sourdough. I do love my kitchen scale. I highly recommend that. It's just going to make you a better baker in general if you go by weight. I do put cup measurements on recipes as well because I know how hard it is to make that transition over. At least it's hard in your head. Once you do it, you realize how easy it is to make the transition, but you can do a lot of this without all of these tools. I do like them. So I'll kind of show you them as I go, but know that you don't have to have all of them to make great bread. So I've got my water mixed in with my starter or my levain, and now I'm gonna add my flour. And I actually really love adding some whole wheat flour to my sourdough. So I have these wheat berries here. I'm gonna mill them up in a second, but I'm going to do 900 grams of bread flour, and then I'll do 100 grams of the whole wheat flour. The whole wheat, it just adds a little bit of extra flavor to your loaf. I don't know that I really taste, whole wheat in the bread, but it adds a little extra flavor. It makes the fermentation go a little bit faster, which I like. It makes the wild yeast and the bacteria, they really react well to that whole wheat. So adding a little bit in can really help your bread. If you don't have whole wheat, that's fine too. You can just use the bread flour. And I do like bread flour. It has a little bit higher protein content, and I often get it from my local mill. This one today is King Arthur. I think they have a good product. Any bread flour that has like 12.5 to 13% protein content is going to be really good for these sourdough loaves. You want something that's going to have really stretchy gluten strands, and to get those, you need a little bit higher protein content. If you don't have like a bread flour, you can add some vital wheat gluten to all-purpose flour, or you can just use all-purpose flour and decrease the water a little bit in your dough. If you are using an all-purpose, this may be too much water for your all-purpose flour to absorb well, and it may get very, very sticky, so you may need to decrease the water. I also say if you're a beginner, decrease the water a little bit, can just help you when you're working with that sticky, maybe more unfamiliar dough. So we're gonna add in our bread flour, and then I'm gonna mill up my wheat berries and do 100 grams of whole wheat in this as well. You will notice as I'm adding this that I'm not adding in the salt yet. I've actually got my salt and a little bit of reserved water to add in after. I will talk a little bit more about that when we add that in. I'm gonna mill this grain right now. I have this Harvest Nutrimill, and I honestly love this machine. I use it a lot in my bread recipes. Usually up to half whole wheat is what I do, but I love it especially for muffins, cookies, all those things. I do a lot of whole wheats. I just love the extra nutrition and the flavor that they bring. But to use this, it's very simple. It's gonna be loud, so you're gonna turn it on, take the top off, and you're gonna pour this grain right into the hopper, and then it's gonna come right out as fresh flour. Turn it off, and that's it. Fresh flour ready to go in my bread. So we're gonna add this flour right on top of our bread flour. Now we're gonna mix it up. This is just the water the starter, the levain, and then the flour, which is, I have a combination of bread flour and whole wheat in here. And we're mixing this up. If you remember, I'm not adding the salt, and I have a little bit of extra reserved water to the side. And the reason I'm not adding the salt, it's kind of a delayed salt adding method, which is called a fermentolyse. You may have heard of that before. You may have heard of the term Autolyse. And Autolyse is when you mix together just the flour and water and you let them sit. And what happens when you mix flour and water together is the gluten starts to form just by mixing them. And salt slows down that gluten formation, shrinks it up a little bit. So it also helps to temper fermentation, which is good. So you don't want to leave salt out of your dough, but if you delay adding it a little bit, you can get usually a little bit nicer of a crumb. So I like to do this delayed salt method. We're going to add in the salt and a little extra water in about 30 minutes. So you're just mixing this up until you get this kind of shaggy dough that's all incorporated together. And then we're going to let this sit in a relatively warm place. You know, that 76 to 80 degree range is what we're looking for about 30 minutes while it fermentolyses. Fermentolyse, we talked about Autolyse, but fermentolyse is what this is because it has the ferment in there. It has the starter or the levain in there with the flour and the water. So it just gives that little bit of extra strength, which I think helps you get a little bit better crumb and rise and all of that with your loaf. So we've got our dough. It's nice and hydrated in with the water. We're going to cover it and let it rest for 30 minutes. I do also like to take the temperature of the dough. So right now it's at 80 degrees, 81. So I know that this is going to ferment fairly quickly because it's at that 80 degrees right now. As it sits in my cold kitchen, it may start to go down, which could affect the fermentation timeline. But knowing the temperature, just sticking a thermometer into your dough is really going to help you to be like, okay, this is going to be on a timeline. If you go to my recipe, I have baker's schedules in my recipes. And so it will tell you based on the temperature and the amount of starter in your dough, when you can expect about to shape your dough, all of those kinds of things. So the temperature is really important. So if you've got a good thermometer, I love this brand, highly recommend them, but go ahead and stick it in your dough just so that you know as you go through the process. We're going to be checking our temperature kind of throughout this whole thing. Hey, I'm covering up my dough here, reusing these shower caps, and we'll come back to it in 30 minutes. It's been 30 minutes. This is what my dough looks like. I'm adding in the salt on top. All you're going to do is take your fingers and you're just pinching together the dough like this. I'm just going to go around. This is the time that we add a little bit of extra strength into the dough. See how it's already forming those gluten strands just by that rest time. I think that's so incredible. I like to do this motion in my bowl as I'm adding the salt in, that I'm really working the dough. It gives you a nice little arm workout. Adding in that extra bit of strength that this dough is going to need during this whole process. Cover it up and rest for 30 more minutes. We're going to go ahead and do our first set of stretch and folds on this dough. I think it's easy to get your hands a little bit damp. That makes it a little bit easier to work with this wet dough. So you just come in, we're going to pull up the dough, stretch it, and fold it over. Stretch it, fold it over, turn the bowl, stretch, fold it over, stretch, fold it over. All this is doing is just lengthening and strengthening those gluten strands, encouraging them. You don't want the dough to tear, but you just want it to start to kind of come together in kind of a ball in the middle of the bowl. When you get to this point, it may not stretch anymore, it won't stretch anymore. The dough is telling you, time to cover it up, let it rest again. So that was my first set. We're gonna be doing 3 or 4 sets total on this dough. So I'm gonna cover it, let it rest again. We're keeping it warm. I'll check the temperature just so I kind of know how fast this is fermenting. We're at about 78, 79. So it should be following the timeline in my recipe card. I happen to have another tub of dough while I'm doing this that I've been working on. And I wanted to show you, sometimes I use this container to do my dough. And instead of doing a stretch and fold, I'll do a coil fold. So I want to show you what that looks like as well. I get my hands wet, you reach in and you just pull up so that your dough forms. See that coil that it's forming? Then you let it fall down and you just turn it and you do another coil, pulling straight up in the center and letting it fall down. You kind of want to get it released at the edges when you do the coils. You can choose if you prefer a coil fold or a stretch and fold for your dough. Either one works well to help strengthen the gluten strands in the dough. And then once it's all together in one spot like this, okay, it won't coil anymore, then you know you're done. Put the lid on, let it rest for another 30 minutes. So that's just an example of a coil if you're interested in switching up your folds. We're on round 2 of stretch and folds. So you can see how the dough spreads out a little bit. So we're gonna just come in, damp hand, stretch up, fold over, turn the bowl, stretch up, fold over, turn the bowl, stretch up, fold over, turn the bowl, stretch up, fold over. And basically, we're still getting it into this shape right in the middle here. And you can see how this dough is looking much more cohesive and strong as we do these folds. We're going to cover it up again and let it rest for another 30 minutes. Third set of stretch and folds right here. Every fold, as you go along, you can just see how much the dough is developing, how strong it's getting. And if it's not looking like this, if it's feeling very wet and hard to work with, okay, then that may be an issue of your flour. It could be that you added too much water or something like that. And so you know for next time to maybe decrease the water a little bit. You could also try to sprinkle in a little bit of flour, but usually I find that doesn't work, quite as well, but you may be able to kind of salvage it that way. Checking the temperature again so I can see, all right, this is now 74. I need to keep it in a warmer place so I can follow my baking timeline. And just so that my wild yeast and my starter in there has the best chance at giving me the best loaf. Right, we're gonna set it to rest. We'll do one more round of stretch and folds. We're gonna wait for 30 minutes. All right, we are on our last set of stretch and folds. I've got my dough in my bread proofer here. You can see how it's looking. Feeling kind of jiggly, spread out. So we're gonna come in here. I wanna check the temperature just so I can kind of see where this is at. Okay, it's at 75, 76. So I know this is gonna maybe take a little bit longer than my baking timeline, and that's okay. I just need to give it an extra, half hour or an hour. But I've got it now in my bread proofer. I've had it there for maybe half hour or so. So hopefully it's gonna bring that temperature up a little bit. I'm gonna come in and do my last sets of stretch and folds. Just strengthening up those gluten strands. You can see how it probably doesn't need any more folds because look at how strong those strands are when I bring them into the middle. Just like that, and the dough is staying. That's what we want to see. We're gonna cover it back up. Actually, if I have water in the bottom of my bread proofer, I don't need to cover it, but I don't really have much water in there right now. So I'm just gonna cover it back up. And we're gonna let it rise for a couple of hours, and then we'll come back and it will be ready to shape. I just pulled the top off here. See it? You can see a few bubbles around the edges. It is doming toward the top. I checked the temperature. We're about 80 degrees. And so I can tell that this is ready to be shaped because it's risen about 30–40%. At that temperature, it's looking bubbly, jiggly. See around the edges. I don't want it to double in size. I want it to rise, but I don't want it to double in size completely, because with sourdough, if it does that, then there's no more like yeast to work on it like you would have in commercial yeast. And so it will just overproof that way. So I'm not really looking for a doubling in size right now. I was just looking for it to feel that jiggly and to rise maybe 30 to 40%. This makes 2 loaves of bread, so I'm just going to cut it in half and pre-shape my dough. All you do is you pick up your dough with one hand and you kind of go around. You're making a nice little circle with your dough, and this just gets your dough ready to shape. We're going to let it sit here. Once it's nicely shaped like that, we're going to let it sit, and for about 30 minutes it'll kind of spread out, flatten a little bit like a pancake almost, and then it will be ready for me to shape. I don't need to cover it right now. It's okay to have a little bit of air on there. This part is going to be the outside of the loaf, so if it gets a little bit of air, it'll be fine once we shape it. I'm going to do the other one. Shape it up. It doesn't matter if you're making a rectangular loaf. I'll show you both, but a rectangular loaf or a circular loaf, you still pre-shape them into a circle. Okay, there we go. We're gonna let them sit and we'll come back to them in about half an hour. See how my dough has really flattened out here? I like to line my bannetons with a hairnet. This just makes the dough not stick when it's in here, so I don't have to use any extra flour with shaping. And if I didn't have the hairnet, you definitely want to flour. Maybe rice flour is the best, but you can use any kind of flour to lightly flour this banneton. You can also use a bowl if you don't have a banneton. It works just as well. You can use a kitchen towel in here. I've even used paper towel. There's so many ways that you could do this without the things, but I'm just showing you how to do it now. So I've got my banneton ready here. And then if I was going to add flour when I was shaping, I would sprinkle it over the top now. And then I come in and I'm flipping it over. And I'm going to pull down and I go up and I go to the side, over the side and over. And then I bring the top one up and over. This is just the way that I shape. And then I kind of come around. I'm just adding that last little bit of tension before it's going to be rising right into my banneton. And I'm going to let it sit for a minute, and then I'll come in and I'm going to stitch up the dough. But it's having a hard time because it's kind of springing back right now, so I have to let it relax, and then I'll come back and do that. I'll show you how I shape up an oval loaf. You're going to want usually an oval Dutch oven if you make an oval loaf, or if you make a circular one, you want a circular Dutch oven usually. I'm going to show you if I'm using the bench scraper and if I was using a little bit of flour, what it would look like. So I've got some flour on top, and you can use the bench scraper to just flip it over. That way the flour stays on the outside of the dough. We're going to do a similar method here. Pull it out. Go in. You don't want to get a lot of flour in the middle of the dough, so it's okay to keep it on the outside. In the middle, you don't want it as much. Up and over we go, and then I just roll it into that little bit of an oval shape, right into my banneton, and then I pinch closed the edges here. Now, if I wanted to bake this today as a same-day loaf, I would let this rise a little bit more here in this banneton. But I like to cold ferment my dough usually. Just gives me a little bit of extra wiggle room. Also, if you're going to score it and you want a nice score, you're going to want to cold ferment it as well. Which just means you're keeping it in the fridge overnight. So I'm covering up my dough. Oh yeah, I was going to show you how I stitch this one up too. This just provides a little bit of extra tension, keeps that circular shape if possible. You don't have to do this, but I like to just kind of get it pinched closed there. And then into the fridge they go. It's the morning. My dough has been cold proofing in the refrigerator. Look how beautiful that looks. Okay, it's ready for me to dump it out, to score it, to stick it in my Dutch oven. I'm preheating my Dutch ovens at 500 degrees. They are hot, they're ready to go. I have an oval Dutch oven and I have a circular Dutch oven that we're going to be using. So I'm going to show you how I score these loaves. I always like to put a piece of parchment paper down. And you don't have to use parchment, but I just feel like it works a little bit better. And then I'm going to dump my dough out onto this parchment paper. I have a bread loam that I'm going to be using to score my dough. This is basically a razor blade, but it's in this nice little scoring device, I guess. Makes it really easy to be able to score my dough any way that I want to. So I really like this one, but you can use any, even a sharp knife can work. So we're going to dump our dough. It looks so beautiful. If you want to do any kind of decorative scoring, I recommend adding a little bit of flour to the top. This is like a whole wheat that I just had sitting here, so I'm using that. Just rub it kind of around, and then I like to do my little scores first. And then I do one larger score that goes a little bit deeper, probably about an inch deep, half an inch or so. And it just comes right in kind of at an angle there, maybe a 30-degree angle. And then that's ready to go into the oven. My best tip for scoring is to do the little scores first. And then the other one is just to make sure that your dough is properly proofed. If it is like sliding too wet and just like collapsing, it's not going to score probably very well. If that does happen to you, or your dough is not holding its shape, stick it in a loaf pan. That really can help it to salvage your loaf. We're going to go ahead and plop this into our Dutch oven and bake it. We're going to reduce the temperature to 450 degrees and bake for 25 minutes with the lid on and then 25 with the lid off. Before we do that, let me show you my circular loaf. Scoring this one, I often do just like a simple cross like that. You can add on, if you wanted to, like some cute little designs, just little slashes, which I usually would do before. But I also like, if I'm doing this in the middle, I just kind of pick up this part here. I just do a little bit of extra. I feel like that this can really just help open up your dough a little bit as it bakes. All right, these are ready for the oven. Woo. I keep the parchment right in the Dutch oven, and you want to work kind of quick, but I also like to put a stone under my Dutch oven to help keep the bottom from burning. Definitely use good quality hot pads as well. I've got those in the oven. They're going to bake for about 25 minutes. Then we're going to take the lid off and bake for another 20 minutes or so. You want the internal temperature to be about 200, 210 degrees Fahrenheit. This is a lean dough, so it needs to bake to a little bit higher to be baked all the way through. Using a Dutch oven is going to give you that crisp, crackly crust on the outside because you're steaming the oven. That's one of the hard things as a sourdough baker, is to steam the oven properly, because home ovens are meant to vent out steam and not keep it in. So for the first like 25 minutes or so of your bake of a sourdough loaf, you want to find a way to get steam into your oven. That's why I like the Dutch oven for a beginner baker. But you can definitely get steam with ice cubes or water, or even lava rocks or things like that that you can do to release steam into your oven during that first bit of baking. It will take you a little bit of trial and error to just figure out how it works with your oven, because every oven's a little bit different. But if you're a true beginner, I still love a good Dutch oven loaf. Look at that gorgeous loaf. And the round one. I pull these off. They're hot, so I use my hot pads, pull them out, and I put this right onto my wire rack so that these can cool completely. I pulled these beautiful loaves out of the oven. They are so crispy on the outside. I'm so excited to cut into them. Really, you should wait. You need to wait till they cool to have the crumb set completely, but I can almost never resist snagging a little heel. So I'm gonna do that right now, just so you can see the inside of this crumb. Oh, wow. Oh. Is that not beautiful? Look at that. Beautiful fermentation all throughout. That is a gorgeous loaf of sourdough bread. This is how easy it is to make. It takes a couple of tries, but you can definitely have this same result in your kitchen. Let's open this guy too. Absolutely beautiful. If you want a loaf like this, I have all the tips. I have everything you need on my website, amybakesbread.com. I even have an online sourdough course that will take you through this entire process, go a little bit more in depth. That has a sourdough community, everything to help you so that you can make this delicious bread at home. I hope that this video is helpful for you. I hope that it encourages you on your sourdough journey. I know you can do it. I know you can make absolutely incredible sourdough bread.